You're listening to Free-ish in Higher Ed. Welcome back to Free-ish in Higher Ed. I'm your host, Chelsea, and today I'm excited to be joined by Michael Richardson from the National Skills Coalition. Michael's doing some incredible work leading national efforts to elevate student voices and shape policy that makes college actually work for everyone. Michael, thank you so much for being here. Can you start by introducing yourself and telling listeners a little about the work you're doing right now at the National Skills Coalition?
Definitely, and thank you for having me. I'm Michael Richardson. I serve as the Director of Worker and Student Voices at National Skills Coalition. My work is really about making sure the voices of workers and learners, folks who are navigating school, work, family, and everything in between are actually heard and valued in national policy conversations. For anyone who hasn't heard of us, National Skills Coalition, or NSC, is a national organization that fights for skills policies that open doors to good jobs, that help businesses grow and build more inclusive economy. We work with a big network of partners that can include workers, students, community colleges, employers, labor groups, advocates, and others who have a stake in skills training and workforce development, all to make sure state and federal policies not only reflect what's happening on the ground, but are also inclusive, equitable, and working for people who need them the most.
What kind of drew you to working at the intersection of student voices, equity, and policy? How did you kind of end up in this role?
My pathway is always really centered on advocacy, organizing and lifting up people's stories. Early in my career through the Bill Emerson National Hunger Fellowship Program, I spent some time in New Orleans working as an advocate and organizer, and then later did some national organizing work in DC. And both of those experiences really grounded me in what it looks like to work alongside communities to push for change and not just talk about issues from the outside. After that, I worked as a business service specialist at a job center in Eastern North Carolina. I was working directly with both businesses and job seekers, helping employers engage in hiring and training folks who need a little extra skill support to get started. It was like my first real deep dive into the workforce development and skills training world, and it opened my eyes to the gaps and barriers people face when they're trying to build a better future for themselves. And then from there, I went on to work at Center for American Progress as an advocacy coordinator. A lot of that work focused on storytelling and making sure there was a human face behind policies and issues that we were talking about. So I spent a lot of time building relationships with people from across the country who were impacted by like healthcare, food, disabilities, and other policies, and helping propel them to share their experiences in national spaces. So like all of those experiences are what made me really interested in this kind of role at the intersection of equity, student, and worker voice and policy. And when I first came to NSC, I was actually a policy analyst. And over time, I moved into managing our state networks as a state network manager. And then I was a senior state network manager. And then through that work, we recognized as an organization that there was a gap in our network. We didn't have like a dedicated structure to bring worker and learner voices into our advocacy in a consistent way. So we created this role to make sure we had real capacity focused on that. And that's kind of how I ended up in the role I am in today.
What an awesome journey. But with your role, that really does help bring, student voices to the national stage. So what does that look like in practice? How are you actually doing that work on like a national scale?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what I do is create platforms and pathways for students and workers to share their experiences directly with decision makers and stakeholders. That can look like bringing folks to DC to talk to members of Congress. It could be like co-writing policy briefs with them, training them to speak at conferences, or just giving them the tools and resources to tell their stories in a powerful way. And that impact has been really real. We've seen students testify on the Hill, contribute to national reports, and shift how lawmakers talk about issues like short-term Pell. But it also changed how we view the work at NSC. Their input has shaped how we communicate, how we approach policy, and how we structure our advocacy. And they've had a bigger voice in our work overall. and we're working even harder to make sure they continue to play a bigger and a more central role. And honestly, we're just getting started.
Yeah, I love that. And I know storytelling with policy, when you're able to bring like a real face or a real voice to some of these issues, it's not just, something on paper anymore. When you bring it to life, and I just think that that has such a really big impact with advocacy work, and it's such meaningful work when
Right.
you have that connection to be able to bring someone with the lived experience with the decision makers. I feel like that's when real change happens. And so
Definitely.
I love seeing the work that you all are doing. And I wanted to kind of talk about, so you're leading the NSC Student Advisory Council, which connects into the Making College Work campaign. Can you kind of walk us through what the council does and the kind of change you all are pushing for?
Yeah, definitely. One of the most exciting parts of my job is leading our Student Advisory Council, which is now a 2-year program. Like you said, it's a part of our Making College Work campaign. So the council brings together a group of workers and learners from across the country, and they meet bi-monthly throughout the year. And during those sessions, they learn a little bit of everything, from policy and research to advocacy, storytelling, and communication skills. In that first year, the focus is on listening and learning and research. So we spend a lot of time hearing directly from council members about the challenges they face navigating skills training and the solutions they come up with. And then we work with them to turn that into a publication. We actually put that publication out last November, I believe. You can find it on our website. It's a way to lift up their perspective and share like concrete recommendations with policymakers and practitioners. And then the second year, we build on that foundation and shift into advocacy and communications. So learning how to tell their stories strategically, engage with decision makers, and then using their voices to push for change. So it's really about equipping them to lead the conversation and not just be a part of it.
Yes, and I actually did take a look at that publication. It's called What Students
Right.
Want. And it's such a easy to digest publication. I am a mom, I'm busy, I'm, in school, I'm working, I have all these things going on, but I was able to sit down with this, and it covers everything from financial aid to public benefits, childcare, transportation. It talks about like real issues that non-traditional students are experiencing. And I love the way that it's put together, and also how it really highlights students and how their situations and circumstances are different and the different needs. That's one thing that really stood
Right.
out to me. It really captures that. And it's also got the data, so I really appreciate that. And I'll make sure to include that in the episode description so listeners can have a quick link to check that out, because I think it's really, really packed with so much valuable information, and the student perspective is what really is centered here. And I love that.
Indeed. It was the first, it was kind of, if I remember correctly, it is the first where a publication was really informed by workers and learners. So like I said earlier, this is something that we're building on, and you can see a lot more of this work happening in the future.
Yeah, I love to see that. Are there any other projects or efforts at NSC right now that you want to highlight, like those focused on helping working learners or advancing equity?
Yeah, for sure. We have a lot of projects that we're working on now. Last year, we launched our first worker voice video series, which spotlighted worker stories in places like New Mexico. We're planning to build on that in the coming year and producing more videos and expanding the series to bring even more perspectives to the national stage. We also just wrapped up a round of listening sessions focused on why workers choose their skills training pathway. And the insights we gather from those conversations are going into a new report that we'll be releasing in this November, which we're really excited about. And if you're interested, we did a similar project last year that we developed a bunch of blog articles that you can find on our website as well. There are 2 articles that where we did these listening sessions too. And on top of that, we're getting ready to launch the second cohort of our Student Advisory Council, now called the Voices for Skills Leadership Council. So there'll be even more opportunities for listening sessions, advocacy engagement, and other ways for folks to plug into our work. And we're also about to kick off a newsletter, which will be another way to keep people connected and informed about what's happening across the network.
I'm really excited about the second cohort. We actually got to hear from Alicia Smalls as well as Lynn Hamblin here on Free-ish, and that was really so incredible for them to share their stories and how different they are. But I know that they participated in that first cohort, and seeing the work that they were able to do with NSC is just really inspiring. So I'm really looking
they're
forward
wonderful.
to that. Yeah, definitely. I wanted to see, with your work at NSC, how do you see storytelling and lived experience really shaping national conversations about education and work? I know we touched on that before, but maybe could you talk more about what that looks like?
Honestly, storytelling is everything in this work. I think you mentioned it earlier about data. Data is important, but stories bring the data to life. When policymakers hear a worker talk about trying to balance school, work, and childcare, or how a specific program helped them move into a family supporting job, that hits a little bit different. So storytelling and lived experience aren't just important tools. They're the core of what the national conversation should be. The people who are actually going through these challenges should have a voice in shaping what the solutions look like. Those who are most impacted by policy are pivotal in driving the conversation. And it's essential that they both have a platform and the resources to do so. So at NSC, we treat storytelling as a strategy. It's not an afterthought. It's how we shift narratives and build momentum for real change.
Right. And I know sometimes when you have the lived experience, there's, stigma, and there's different things that can be barriers for people with lived experience to feel comfortable sharing it. But I love seeing the work that NSC is doing and creating a safe space for students to really express their circumstance in a way that has a meaningful impact. And so that kind of leads me to my next question about people who might be curious about advocacy but haven't gotten involved yet. Maybe what advice would you give them about how to become part of the work that you're leading and how they can get engaged?
I think just know that your voice matters. If you don't have to be a policy expert to make an impact. In fact, your lived experience is often the most powerful thing you can bring. So don't be intimidated. Always remember that policymakers work for you and that the policies they're debating and shaping are often the ones that impact your life the most. So policy is personal and you have every right to be a part of the conversation. So get out there, make connections, write to your local newspaper, reach out to community colleges, your local nonprofit organizations. And of course, you can connect with us at National Skills Coalition, and we'll do our best to get you plugged in and engaged. So yeah, that I think you can always make sure that we can leave you the information so you can connect with me, and we'll look to get you engaged in the work that we're doing.
Yeah, thank you so much for that open invitation. And I wanted to make a comment about, I always like to say that people are experts in their lived experience. So like you are an expert in that. You don't really need any special qualifications when it comes to being an advocate. And a lot of times what I found is that just showing up, sometimes just being there, being present, and with a willingness to engage, can make such a big impact. And I will be sure to include a link to the NSC website as well as the What Students Want publication. I really wanted to thank you so much for joining us today on Free-ish and Higher Ed. I appreciate your time today.
Thanks for having me. It was great.
If something in this episode moved you or resonated with you, don't be afraid to use your voice or step into your purpose. And if you want to be part of this conversation or have a story to tell, I want to hear it. You can email me at free.ishpodcast@gmail.com. That's free.ishpodcast@gmail.com. You can also DM me on Instagram at free.ishpodcast. We're free-ish, and we're claiming our space unapologetically.